In 1382, 23 distinguished nobles gathered in a bedroom to witness the most important diplomatic ceremony of the year. They weren't criminals, they were ambassadors, court officials, and political advisors, all there to ensure a crucial international treaty was properly ratified. The ratification process involved watching a 12-year-old girl being prepared for bed by her attendants. This was considered the highlight of medieval diplomacy. The child Anne of Bohemia represented the key to peace between England and the Holy Roman Empire. Her successful integration into English royal society would prevent a war that could have killed thousands. So when she shook uncontrollably during the ceremony requiring 3 separate attempts, before the proceedings could continue, the witnesses simply took detailed notes to ensure everything was legally binding. This was, after all, standard diplomatic protocol. But Anne's experience was actually quite gentle compared to other international negotiations of the era. 6-year-old Isabella of Valois had once stood in a cathedral, representing the entire future of French-English relations. Her marriage contract would end the 100 Years' War and save countless lives. When the ceremony concluded, she asked her attendants, "When do I go home?" The French diplomat smiled and explained that she was home now. Her successful transition to English society was worth more than any amount of gold or territory. These weren't unusual diplomatic arrangements. In 1445, 15-year-old Margaret of Anju spent 3 days in careful preparation before her crucial summit with English representatives. She was understandably nervous about such an important political responsibility. The entire balance of European power rested on her shoulders. When she briefly became overwhelmed and needed encouragement from nobles to proceed with the ceremony, it was simply the natural anxiety any young diplomat might feel before such a momentous occasion. Medieval Europe had perfected the art of international relations through personal diplomacy. Rather than relying on cold treaties and abstract agreements, they created living bonds between kingdoms' human connections that made war literally unthinkable, because it would mean destroying family ties. These arrangements required careful selection of representatives, extensive preparation, and precise ceremonial protocols to ensure the agreements would be honored for generations. Young women were particularly effective ambassadors because they could form the deepest, most lasting connections with foreign courts. Their marriages created permanent alliances that no mere paper treaty could match. A daughter who successfully integrated into a foreign kingdom became a living guarantee of peace, her children serving as bridges between 2 cultures. But why were these young diplomatic representatives sometimes reluctant to embrace their crucial roles? What made some of medieval Europe's most privileged women hesitant about what should have been the greatest honor of their lives? And why did the most powerful families in Europe need such elaborate ceremonies to formalize what were essentially peace agreements? The answer reveals something profound about how medieval Europe understood power, loyalty, and the price of peace. Because it turns out that when you look closely at these diplomatic marriages, you start to notice details that don't quite fit the official story. Small inconsistencies that suggest these ceremonies weren't quite the honor they appeared to be. And once you start seeing the cracks in the narrative, you begin to realize that medieval Europe had developed something far more sophisticated and sinister than simple political alliances. Before we examine exactly what these ceremonies really involved, tell me in the comments, where in the world are you hearing this story? I love knowing our community spans every corner of the globe, all of us drawn to those moments when official history doesn't quite match the evidence hidden in the details. Medieval marriage was simply business, nothing particularly shocking about that concept. Even today, wealthy families carefully consider strategic partnerships when arranging their children's futures. Political dynasties still marry within their circles, tech billionaires still network through family connections, and royal families across the world continue to factor diplomatic considerations into their marriage choices. Medieval royal daughters were valuable diplomatic assets, much like having prime real estate or controlling shares in a major corporation. The marriage negotiation process was actually quite sophisticated. Take William de Montfort, a successful cloth trader in 1340, writing to his brother about his daughter Alice. Sweet Alice grows more promising each season. Her successful placement could secure us trading rights throughout Normandy, and early assessments suggest she'll adapt well to foreign commercial partnerships. Medieval families approached marriage like modern businesses approach mergers, with careful evaluation, strategic planning, and detailed contractual arrangements. Royal families took this business approach even further. Young Joanna of England, daughter of Edward III, received specialized diplomatic training from age 4. She had a dedicated instructor who taught her proper protocol for greeting foreign dignitaries, appropriate conversation techniques for international settings, and cultural adaptation skills for various European courts. Her father maintained active negotiations with multiple kingdoms, simultaneously keeping his options open, depending on which alliance would prove most valuable for England's interests. This flexibility was actually quite practical. Medieval politics shifted rapidly, and a marriage arrangement that seemed beneficial one year might become disadvantageous the next if alliances changed. So royal daughters received broad-based preparation that would serve them well in any European court. They learned multiple languages, studied various religious customs, and mastered the social graces expected of international representatives. The marriage contracts themselves read like modern corporate agreements. Isabella of Valois' engagement documents specified territory transfers, trade concessions, military support obligations, and detailed timelines for implementation. Her marriage wasn't just a personal ceremony, it was a comprehensive peace treaty between France and England, with her successful integration serving as the guarantee that both sides would honor their commitments. Of course, medieval families started these diplomatic preparations early. Life expectancy was shorter. Then political situations changed rapidly, and it took years to properly prepare a young woman for successful international representation. Isabella's preliminary arrangements began when she was quite young, around 15, according to some sources, though. Other documents suggest she may have been closer to 12 when initial negotiations started. Actually, reviewing the historical records more carefully, it appears many royal marriages involved even younger brides than initially thought. Constance of Sicily's marriage arrangements were finalized when she was approximately 8 years old, though the actual ceremony waited until she was more mature. While the documents are a bit unclear on timing, some suggest she was 6 during the ceremony. Others indicate she might have been as young as 4 when the arrangements were first implemented. This is where the historical record becomes somewhat uncomfortable for modern readers. Medieval noble families occasionally arranged marriages for daughters who were quite young indeed. In 1160, little Constance was officially married at age 3 to secure crucial alliances between Sicily and the Holy Roman Empire. But surely this was just a ceremonial arrangement, with the actual marriage responsibilities delayed until she reached a more appropriate age. Except the historical evidence suggests otherwise. Marriage contracts from this period explicitly state that young brides were to be delivered immediately to their new households for proper preparation and integration. The assumption was that early placement would ensure better cultural adaptation and stronger loyalty to their new families. Constance's marriage document, preserved in Vatican archives, specifies that she should be raised as a possession of her new family until reaching full marital age. The language in these contracts is revealing. Medieval families didn't think about children the way we do today. They viewed early marriage arrangements as practical investments in political stability. The younger the bride, the more completely she could be shaped to serve her new family's interests. A 3-year-old would have no conflicting loyalties, no established preferences, and no ability to resist her new circumstances. Oh, but let's not judge medieval families too harshly by modern standards. Their world was brutally competitive, and family survival often depended on making strategic alliances before rival families could interfere. They saw early marriage arrangements as protecting their daughters by securing their futures in powerful households. From their perspective, leaving a young girl unmarried was leaving her vulnerable to less advantageous arrangements later. The preparation process for these young diplomatic representatives was quite thorough. Medieval families hired specialists to assess their daughters' suitability for various international placements. Health consultations were standard practice. Any responsible parent would want to ensure their child was physically capable of fulfilling her diplomatic responsibilities successfully. These consultations initially sound reasonable enough. Families consulted physicians to evaluate their daughter's general health growth potential and likelihood of successful adaptation to foreign climates. Basic medical assessments were simply good parenting in an era of limited health care and uncertain living conditions. But the historical records reveal that these health consultations became increasingly detailed as the marriage market grew more competitive. In 1356, a Flemish merchant hired a retired court physician to conduct what the documents describe as a comprehensive evaluation of future diplomatic potential for his 10-year-old daughter before negotiating her placement with a German banking family. The physician's report, discovered in monastery archives, describes the evaluation process in clinical terms that become progressively more disturbing. He examined the child's teeth to assess overall health quality, as one might evaluate livestock before purchase. He measured various physical attributes with calipers and other instruments, conducting what he termed an assessment of her prospects for successful integration into foreign household duties. The child, according to the medical notes, wept continuously throughout the assessment process and repeatedly requested her mother's presence, but maintained sufficient composure for accurate measurements. The physician concluded that she was adequately developed for immediate placement, though her emotional responses suggest she may require firm guidance during the transition period. Reading these historical documents with modern eyes, something starts to feel deeply wrong about this entire system. The language keeps shifting from diplomatic terminology to something that sounds more like livestock evaluation. The young girls being assessed seem less like diplomatic representatives and more like commodities being prepared for transfer. And the ages keep getting younger in the historical record. The more documents you examine, the more you realize that medieval noble families were routinely arranging marriages for children who could barely walk, let alone understand the political implications of their situations. But surely these were just ceremonial arrangements, with the actual marriage responsibilities delayed until the girls reached maturity. Unfortunately, the evidence suggests otherwise. Marriage contracts explicitly required immediate delivery and integration of young brides into their new households. The logic was that earlier placement ensured more complete loyalty and better cultural adaptation. Medieval families defended this system by arguing that young women needed extensive preparation to fulfill their complex diplomatic roles. A successful royal marriage required mastery of foreign languages, understanding of court customs, and complete loyalty to new political interests. This preparation allegedly took years and was best started as early as possible. Yet when you examine personal accounts from the young women themselves, the preparation process sounds less like diplomatic training and more like systematic isolation, designed to break down existing loyalties. Marie de Champagne wrote letters describing her arrival in Hungary at age 13, where her French attendants were immediately dismissed and replaced with Hungarian women who spoke no French. The linguistic isolation wasn't accidental, it was explicitly designed policy. Marie's new handlers had received specific instructions to prevent her from maintaining emotional connections to France. She was forbidden from speaking, French prohibited from writing letters home, and surrounded by people whose job was to monitor her behavior and report any signs of resistance to the transition process. Marie described her experience as living in a tower of silence where every face belongs to a stranger and every word sounds like a curse in an alien tongue. She began to understand that her diplomatic preparation was actually systematic psychological isolation, designed to make her completely dependent on her new Hungarian family for all social connection and emotional support. So let me pause here and make sure I understand what we've uncovered so far. We have noble families conducting detailed physical examinations of girls as young as 8, using instruments and measurement techniques typically reserved for livestock evaluation. We have marriage contracts that explicitly transfer these children to foreign households as possessions to be shaped for proper service. We have systematic isolation protocols designed to break down their emotional connections to their birth families and make them completely dependent on strangers for survival. And we have extensive documentation that this was considered not just normal, but exemplary diplomatic practice throughout medieval Europe. This isn't starting to sound like marriage diplomacy anymore. This is starting to sound like systematic child trafficking, with elaborate ceremonial justification. Welcome to the Historical Autopsy. We followed the evidence from diplomatic marriages, through health consultations, to cultural preparation. And now, we need to examine what actually happened when these children reached their new homes. The medieval chroniclers called it marriage consummation ceremony. Modern analysis reveals it was systematic trauma designed to destroy any remaining resistance to their new circumstances. The bedding ceremony represents the most damning evidence of this system's true purpose. Medieval courts didn't just want political alliances, they wanted psychologically broken women who could never threaten the established order or maintain loyalty to their birth families. The public consummation ritual served as the final stage of a carefully designed process to destroy these young women's sense of personal agency forever. Catherine of Valois' experience in 1420 provides the most detailed historical record of how this psychological destruction operated. When she married Henry V of England, the bedding ceremony involved 42 official witnesses, including foreign ambassadors whose job was to report back to their governments that the political alliance had been properly sealed. The ceremony wasn't about celebrating love or even ensuring legitimate heirs. It was about public humiliation designed to break Catherine's spirit completely. Catherine was 19 years old but had been deliberately kept ignorant of sexual matters as part of her diplomatic preparation. When the witnesses began the ceremonial undressing, she apparently had no understanding of what was expected and fought violently against the proceedings. Court records describe how she had to be physically restrained by 4 women, while male observers watched and took detailed notes for their official reports. The ceremony lasted over 3 hours. Catherine was examined by court physicians to verify her virginity, then held down while witnesses inspected her body for signs of readiness for marriage duties. She was then forced into bed with Henry while the observers arranged themselves in a semicircle around the bedchamber to ensure the consummation was completed according to diplomatic protocol. A court musician later wrote that Catherine's terror was so complete that even hardened soldiers standing guard outside the chamber were visibly disturbed by the sounds emanating from within. The official court record preserved in British archives notes that Catherine required constant physical restraint to prevent flight from the marriage bed, and her distress was so extreme that the king himself appeared uncomfortable with the proceedings. But Catherine's experience wasn't exceptional. It was the standard protocol for royal marriages throughout medieval Europe. The systematic humiliation served multiple purposes. It demonstrated the bride's complete submission to her new family's authority. It provided legal witnesses to the marriage's consummation. And it created trauma so severe that resistance to future demands became psychologically impossible. Medieval medical texts reveal the physical cost of this system with clinical precision. Dr. Trotula of Salerno, one of the few female physicians of the era, documented extensive case studies of treating royal women for what she termed marriage injuries. Her notes preserved in the medical school of Salerno describe treating queens for internal bleeding, broken bones, and what modern doctors would recognize as severe psychological trauma. One case study describes a 14-year-old queen who could not tolerate the presence of any male person, including court physicians, without experiencing fits of trembling that persisted for hours. Another documents a 12-year-old bride who lost the capacity for speech entirely following her marriage ceremony and communicated only through gestures for the remainder of her brief life. The pregnancy statistics tell an even more damning story. Medieval royal women experienced miscarriage rates nearly 3 times higher than common women despite having access to the best available medical care. They also died in childbirth at significantly higher rates than their social inferiors. Modern medical analysis suggests these complications were trauma-induced, the direct result of systematic sexual violence beginning in childhood. Dr. Monica Green's analysis of hundreds of medieval medical texts found consistent references to treating childbed injuries in young queens, a medical specialty that developed specifically to address the inevitable physical damage from consummating marriages with children. These weren't accidents or unfortunate side effects. They were predictable consequences of a system that treated children's bodies as disposable resources for political gain. The psychological warfare extended far beyond the marriage ceremony itself. Medieval courts understood that controlling information and social connections was essential for maintaining dominance over foreign queens. The isolation protocols were scientifically designed to create psychological dependence that would prevent rebellion or resistance. Agnes of Moran's letters to her sister describe the deliberate humiliation tactics used by her new French court. French nobles would discuss her body, her breeding potential, and her value as a political asset, while she stood directly in front of them as if she were an inanimate object incapable of understanding their conversations. They debate whether my hips are wide enough for easy births, whether my pale complexion indicates good health or hidden sickness, and whether my German blood will make French babies stronger or weaker," she wrote. "They speak of me as if I'm already dead, and they are planning how to arrange my corpse for display." But here's what the official histories never mention. Some of these women fought back, and when they did, their resistance reshaped European history in ways that are still visible today. Isabella of France spent years enduring systematic humiliation from her husband Edward II and his male lovers, who were given precedence over the Queen in all court ceremonies. She was forced to watch Edward shower attention and gifts on his favorites, while she sat ignored at state dinners, publicly demonstrating her worthlessness in the political hierarchy. But Isabella was learning. She understood that the system only worked if women accepted their degradation passively. So she began planning something unprecedented in medieval politics: systematic revenge that would destroy not just her tormentors, but the entire political structure that had created her suffering. In 1326, Isabella invaded England with her lover Roger Mortimer, captured her husband, and had him murdered in Berkeley Castle using a method that was deliberately symbolic. Edward died from a red-hot poker inserted through his bowel, a grotesque mockery of his sexual preferences and the sexual violence that had defined Isabella's own marriage. The murder took place in front of witnesses, just like her own wedding night humiliation. Isabella had learned that if you want to break someone completely, you make their destruction a public spectacle. Eleanor of Aquitaine represents the ultimate evolution of royal female resistance. Married first to Louis VII of France at age 15, she endured years of being told she was too strong-willed and unfeminine for refusing to be broken by traditional intimidation tactics. So Eleanor decided to break the system instead. She deliberately sabotaged her first marriage by refusing to produce male heirs, conducting public affairs that humiliated Louis VII, and eventually securing an annulment by claiming consanguinity. She then married Henry II of England and proceeded to outlive him, outlive most of her sons, and shape European politics for over 80 years. Eleanor's revolutionary insight was understanding that the medieval marriage system only functioned if women played their assigned victim roles. She refused to play. When circumstances required submission, she submitted strategically while building power bases that would allow future resistance. When opportunities for open rebellion arose, she seized them ruthlessly. She dressed like a man when it suited her purposes, led armies against her own husband, and turned her daughters into political weapons, as effective as her sons. The most chilling example of royal female resistance comes from Joanna of Castile, known as Juana la Loca, or Joan the Maid. Us modern historians believe Joan wasn't mentally ill at all. She was conducting a calculated resistance campaign against a system that wanted to declare her insane in order to steal her inheritance and control her children. Joan's madness manifested only during political negotiations, when her consent was required for major decisions. She would become hysterical when marriage contracts were presented, confused when asked to sign away territorial rights, and incapacitated when her husband attempted to assume control of her kingdom. Her mad behavior was so precisely timed to coincide with political pressure that it represents clear evidence of a brilliant woman using feigned insanity as a legal strategy to maintain some control over her own life. So the real curse wasn't supernatural, it was a political system that discovered systematic trauma could be weaponized for diplomatic control. Medieval courts didn't accidentally traumatize royal women. They did it deliberately because broken people are predictable people who won't challenge existing power structures. But here's the twist that medieval men never anticipated. Broken people with intelligence, resources, and political connections eventually stop trying to heal and start planning revenge. When you systematically abuse someone for years while teaching them how power actually operates, you're essentially providing graduate-level education in political warfare to your future enemies. The consequences of medieval Europe's trauma-based diplomacy continue to shape our world today. Every major political upheaval in European history can be traced back to royal women who either broke under systematic abuse or refused to break and transform their suffering into revolutionary political strategy. The War of the Roses, which tore England apart for 30 years, began with Margaret of Anjou's traumatic integration into English politics. Margaret had arrived from France at 15, endured the standard humiliation ceremonies, and spent years being told she was too foreign to understand English political traditions. But Margaret understood politics better than her critics realized. She had learned that in a world designed to destroy women, the only survival strategy was to destroy potential threats before they could strike. Her paranoid protection of her son's inheritance rights wasn't madness. It was rational strategy developed by a woman who understood that mercy was a luxury she couldn't afford. Margaret's political maneuvering ultimately plunged England into civil war. But from her perspective, war was preferable to watching her child suffer the same systematic abuse she had endured. The War of the Roses wasn't really about succession disputes. It was about a traumatized mother who would rather burn England down than let the system that broke her touch her son. The 100 Years' War between England and France also has direct roots in this system. Isabella of France, who murdered her husband Edward II, raised her son Edward III with such hatred for the French court that had originally sold her into marriage slavery that he spent his entire reign attempting to conquer France. Isabella had learned that diplomatic marriage was simply warfare conducted through women's bodies, so she taught her son to fight actual wars instead. Edward III's invasion of France wasn't just about territorial claims, it was the military expression of his mother's psychological wounds. Even the Protestant Reformation connects to this tradition of royal female resistance. Henry VIII's desperate need to control his wife's reproductive capabilities, combined with his experience of strong-willed queens like Catherine of Aragon, who refused to be intimidated by traditional tactics, directly led to England's break with Rome and the establishment of royal supremacy over marriage law. Henry had grown up watching his mother Elizabeth of York navigate post-War of the Roses politics by becoming a political survivor rather than a victim. When his own wives proved equally unbreakable, Henry decided to change the entire religious system rather than admit he couldn't control women using his predecessor's methods. The most important legacy of this system was the creation of what historians now call the survival school of royal women. By the late medieval period, European courts were filled with queens who had learned to weaponize their trauma, transforming their suffering into sophisticated political strategy. These women became the mothers and grandmothers of Renaissance monarchs, and they passed down crucial lessons about power survival and the strategic use of violence. Catherine de' Medici, who terrorized France during the Wars of Religion, was the descendant of women who had survived the medieval trauma system by becoming more ruthless than their oppressors. Catherine learned from studying her female ancestors that mercy was a luxury women in power couldn't afford, and that the only way to ensure your children's survival was to eliminate potential threats before they could organize resistance. The St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, where thousands of Protestants were slaughtered on Catherine's orders, represents the logical endpoint of centuries of royal women learning that preemptive violence was the only reliable form of self-defense. Elizabeth I of England represents perhaps the ultimate evolution of this tradition. The daughter of Anne Boleyn, who was executed when Elizabeth was 3 years old, Elizabeth grew up studying the fates of her female predecessors and understanding that marriage was fundamentally a death trap for powerful women. She learned that the only way to avoid being destroyed by the marriage system was to refuse to participate in it entirely. Elizabeth's famous declaration that she was married to England wasn't romantic rhetoric. It was calculated political strategy developed by a woman who had spent her entire life studying how marriage destroyed female rulers. By remaining unmarried, Elizabeth avoided the systematic subordination that marriage would have required while maintaining the diplomatic flexibility of potential future alliances. She had learned from her predecessors' experiences that power and marriage were fundamentally incompatible for women in her position. Here's what should disturb us about this historical pattern. Variations of this trauma-based control system persisted well into the modern era. Royal women were still being married off for political alliances through World War I. Queen Victoria's granddaughters were scattered across European thrones like political chess pieces. And when World War I began, it was essentially a family war fought between cousins whose grandmothers had all survived versions of the medieval marriage system. The unprecedented brutality of World War I wasn't just about new military technology. It was about royal families who had been taught for centuries that mercy was weakness and total victory was the only acceptable outcome. Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany, Tsar Nicholas II of Russia, and King George III of England were all grandsons of Queen Victoria, raised by women who understood that political survival required the willingness to destroy anyone who threatened family power. Even today, we can see echoes of this system in how political dynasties arrange strategic marriages, how wealthy families consolidate power through carefully planned partnerships, and how societies still struggle with the idea that women can be both politically valuable and personally autonomous. The medieval queens who survived systematic trauma didn't just endure, they transformed their survival strategies into dynastic political wisdom that continues to influence how power operates in the modern world. Perhaps the most chilling realization is that medieval Europe didn't accidentally create this system. They deliberately designed it to be traumatic because they understood that broken people are easier to control. They weren't just breaking individual women, they were breaking the mothers of future kings, ensuring that every medieval monarch was shaped by watching their mothers survive or succumb to systematic abuse. But medieval men never understood the most important consequence of their system. Trauma doesn't always create compliance. Sometimes it creates revolution. The queens who survived the cursed chambers of medieval marriage didn't just endure, they learned. They learned that systems built on cruelty are inherently unstable, that power based on fear eventually creates fearless enemies, and that the only way to stop being a victim is to become something far more dangerous than your oppressors ever imagined. Medieval Europe created its own worst nightmare: intelligent, resourceful women with nothing left to lose and every reason for revenge. These women spent centuries systematically dismantling the very system that created them, and their descendants continue to reshape our world according to lessons learned in the darkness of medieval bedchambers. The cursed chamber of medieval royal marriage wasn't just a room where children were destroyed, it was a laboratory where some of history's most dangerous political minds were forged. And the world is still living with the consequences of what those women learned when they decided that survival required becoming more ruthless than the system that tried to break them. What do you think? Were these women victims who found strength, or did the trauma itself create the political intelligence that would eventually transform European history? Let me know in the comments what struck you most about this dark chapter of human political evolution. The past has many more secrets waiting to be uncovered, and not all of them are as buried as the powerful would like us to believe.